The phone call came late in the morning, a casual enough tone that could have fooled anyone, except me. "Oh, we just changed the wedding time," she said, her voice clipped, rehearsed. "Hope that's okay." My daughter-in-law, my son's wife, the one I had welcomed into the family with open arms, only to discover that behind her smile was a streak of calculated ambition. I paused, letting the words settle. "Changed the time?" I repeated, my voice soft, almost indifferent. But inside, a slow, sharp fire began to coil in my chest. "Yes, Mom," she said, her tone sweet, almost patronizing. "We thought it would be more convenient for everyone. You know, for the guests." Convenient. I tasted the word like poison. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted control. She wanted to test me. And she didn't know one thing, something that made my pulse steady with quiet confidence. I owned the banquet hall. I could almost hear her smug satisfaction if she knew the impact of her little change. But she didn't. Not yet. And that was the beauty of it. I had time, patience, and the perfect stage. Every detail, tables, decorations, lights, timing, was mine. Every guest's step would be carefully orchestrated. I hung up the phone and walked to the window overlooking the city, the afternoon sun catching the faint shimmer of gold in the skyline. I felt a thrill that wasn't just anticipation, it was power. She thought she was moving pieces on a board she controlled. She had no idea the queen was already 3 steps ahead. I poured a glass of water, the cool liquid grounding me as I plotted the next move. Today, I would let her believe she had won. Tomorrow, I would show her exactly who really controlled the game. I spent the rest of the day walking through the banquet hall, my heels clicking against the polished floors, the echo filling the vast space like a drumbeat of anticipation. Every table was set, every chair aligned, every centerpiece perfectly balanced. The flowers smelled faintly of roses and lilies, their fragrance drifting through the air, sweet and deceptively calm. I smiled to myself, imagining the chaos my daughter-in-law had unknowingly scheduled herself into. She thought shifting the ceremony by an hour would inconvenience me or make me scramble. But every clock, every detail, every catering schedule was under my control. She didn't know I had already anticipated this move months ago. As I walked past the stage, I ran my hand along the polished oak railing, feeling the smooth grain under my fingers. This was my domain. My son might have married her, but I still ran the halls where memories, celebrations, and family milestones were etched into the walls. I inhaled deeply, tasting the calm before the storm, knowing that her little plan would unravel without me lifting a finger. Later, I glanced at the schedule again. The catering team, the lighting crew, even the musicians, all coordinated down to the minute. I adjusted one small detail, almost imperceptible to anyone else, and smiled at the thought of her confusion when she realized no one would be waiting at the new time. She had assumed control, but she had forgotten to check whose house she had entered. By evening, the hall was quiet again, lit softly by the chandeliers. I lingered near the entrance, imagining her arrival, imagining her panic when her plans collided with mine. There would be no shouting, no spectacle, just the perfect quiet unraveling of her assumptions. And that, I decided, would be far more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation. The morning of the wedding, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the banquet hall, glinting off the crystal chandeliers like 1,000 tiny stars. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the faint tang of polished wood and waxed floors. Everything was perfect, immaculately arranged, and I waited, calm, watching the clock tick toward the time she had tried to dictate. Guests began arriving, their laughter and chatter filling the hall. I noticed the confusion in the subtle glances exchanged. Many of them had RSVP'd based on the original time. The bride, my daughter-in-law, hadn't yet arrived, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. Her carefully planned change had no effect. None. She had assumed I would scramble or yield. She had forgotten who owned the space, who controlled the rhythm of the event. Finally, I saw her car pull up, her face taut with a mix of determination and barely concealed panic. She stepped out, glancing at her watch, then at the crowd already gathering inside. The moment her eyes met mine, I could see it. The sudden realization, the prickling awareness that her little scheme had backfired. I approached her, calm and measured. "Good morning," I said softly, the smile on my face almost tender. "I see you've noticed our guests are ready." Her jaw tightened. I thought," she stammered. "You thought you could move the wedding by an hour without anyone noticing," I said, letting the words hang in the air, weighty and precise. "But this is my hall, my staff, my schedule. You can change the time all you like, but you can't change who runs the show." Her face flushed crimson, and I watched as panic flickered in her eyes. The crowd was quiet now, noticing the tension but unaware of its origin. I felt a thrill, not of cruelty, but of justice. She had tested me. She had tried to assert power where she had none. And now, quietly, the truth was undeniable. I gave her a small, almost maternal nod. "Now let's get you down the aisle. The rest of us have been waiting." Inside the hall, the atmosphere was electric, a mix of excitement and underlying tension that only I could sense. Guests were seated, murmuring softly, unaware of the small drama playing out behind the smiles and dresses. I moved among them, adjusting napkins, straightening table settings, my presence invisible but commanding. Meanwhile, she hovered near the entrance, her face tight with frustration and disbelief. Every glance she threw toward the clock, every hurried whisper to her bridesmaids, betrayed her panic. She had thought changing the wedding time would give her control, a small victory, and now that illusion was crumbling before her eyes. The musicians began to play, a soft melody that floated across the hall, wrapping the guests in anticipation. I stood near the stage, watching as she attempted to marshal the bridal party, her movements sharp and tense. Nothing she did disrupted the flow I had orchestrated. Every cue, every detail was under my command, and she couldn't touch it. I could feel the subtle shift in the room's energy, the bride's authority slipping while mine held steady. The scent of flowers mingled with the faint aroma of polished wood and freshly pressed linens, a sensory reminder that this was my domain. She tried to approach me, her lips moving in a hurried apology, but I simply smiled, serene and unflinching. "You see," I said softly, letting my voice carry just enough for her to hear, "planning is more than just changing a time on a phone. It's about understanding the space, the people, and the rhythm of the day. That's something you can't fake." Her shoulders slumped, the fire in her eyes dimming. She realized, too late, that the day had never been hers to control, and as she stepped aside, defeated, I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from the inevitability of justice. The guests didn't notice the small victory, but I did. Every detail unfolded perfectly, every timeline adhered to, every expectation met. She had tried to manipulate the day. I had reminded her without a word of confrontation in front of anyone that control was not hers to claim. The ceremony began, sunlight streaming through the hall's grand windows, casting long golden beams across the aisle. Guests leaned forward in anticipation, their murmurs hushed as the music swelled. Every movement, every step, every note of the song was exactly as I had orchestrated. The timing, the lighting, the rhythm, flawless. I watched my daughter-in-law walk down the aisle, her posture rigid, her smile tight. She tried to compose herself, but I could see the tension in the way her hands gripped her bouquet, the slight tremor in her jaw, the flicker of panic in her eyes as she realized that she had been powerless all along. She had changed the wedding time, thinking it would give her control, and now she was forced to follow the schedule I had set, helpless and exposed. My son looked radiant, unsuspecting, filled with love and excitement. I felt a pang of pride and satisfaction as I watched him, knowing the ceremony would go off without a hitch despite her manipulations. The guests were oblivious to the subtle battle of wills unfolding before them. To them, it was a perfect wedding. To me, it was a quiet victory. As the officiant spoke, the hall held its collective breath. I noticed her stealing glances at me, as if hoping I would intervene or falter, but I didn't. I was calm, collected, untouchable. Every guest's step, every whispered instruction from the staff, every delicate flicker of candlelight was under my control. When the couple exchanged vows, her voice wavered slightly, betraying her inner frustration. She had tried to assert dominance, to control the flow of the day, and yet here she was, participating in a ceremony entirely shaped by me. I felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing the full scope of one's own power and patience. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the applause erupted. I stepped back, letting the moment wash over the room. She had learned in the most subtle but undeniable way that the day had never been hers to command, and for the first time, I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The reception buzzed with energy, the hall now alive with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. The scent of roasted chicken and honey-glazed vegetables mingled with soft floral undertones, creating a warm, intoxicating atmosphere. Guests moved from table to table, exchanging congratulations, while I oversaw every detail from my vantage point near the head table, calm and composed, fully in control. My daughter-in-law flitted among the guests, attempting to project ease, but I could see the cracks in her composure. She hovered near the cake, fussing over the placement of the knife, the positioning of the tiers, like a director trying to reclaim control over a script that had already been written. Every misstep she tried to correct, I had already accounted for. She had assumed she could manipulate the day to suit herself. But now, in the midst of celebration, her inability to control anything was painfully clear. I watched her approach one of my longtime friends, trying to engage in conversation, her voice slightly forced. My friend, polite but sharp-eyed, responded with practiced warmth that subtly exposed her lack of authority. She tried again, adjusting table settings behind my back, only to have a staff member, trained to follow my precise plan, quietly correct her. Each correction was minor, almost imperceptible, but collectively they chipped away at her illusion of influence. I could feel her growing frustration like static electricity in the air, a tangible energy that made the moment deliciously satisfying. Meanwhile, the guests continued their enjoyment, oblivious to the subtle power play. My son, laughing with old friends, completely unaware of the tension behind the smiles, felt the ease of a well-executed day. I smiled inwardly, proud of the harmony I had maintained, the balance between celebration and quiet domination. Later, when the speeches began, she tried to take control, stepping forward too soon, fumbling with her notes. I caught her eye and smiled, a small, knowing gesture. She froze, realizing she was still under my subtle command, even in the limelight. When it was finally her turn to speak, her voice was polite, carefully measured, her usual bravado replaced with a cautious humility she hadn't anticipated needing. By the end of the evening, the entire event had unfolded flawlessly, every detail a testament to the fact that control, patience, and preparation always triumph over impulsive scheming. As the last guests departed, the hall quieted, and I stood alone for a moment, breathing in the calm. The day had been a triumph, not just for the couple, but for me, the orchestrator, the quietly commanding force behind every detail. She had attempted manipulation, but in the end, she had learned the hard way that the real power never lies in the ability to disrupt. It lies in understanding and controlling the entire stage. And as I locked the doors behind me, I felt an undeniable sense of satisfaction, knowing that lesson had been etched into her memory forever. The days after the wedding were quiet, but the ripples of that day's events carried through the family like a current no one could ignore. At first, my daughter-in-law tried to act as if nothing had happened, smiling, chatting, attempting to reclaim the air of authority she had assumed she possessed. But every move she made was measured now, cautious, weighed against the invisible power she had confronted and lost. I noticed it in small ways. Her hesitations when coordinating family gatherings, The subtle deference in conversation when I entered the room, the way she would pause before taking action, aware that the hall, the events, the family traditions, they were mine to guide. She had learned the boundaries, the limits of her influence, without me ever needing to scold or confront her harshly. That was the beauty of quiet power. It was understood instinctively. My son, too, noticed the shift. He would glance at me with an unspoken recognition, a mix of pride and relief that I had handled the situation without drama, without undermining him, and without letting the event descend into chaos. I felt that moment of satisfaction, knowing the family had seen who truly commanded respect, not through force, but through foresight and calm authority. I took time for myself, too, reclaiming evenings and weekends that had been consumed by the stress of wedding planning and subtle sabotage. I spent mornings walking through the hall, the familiar smell of polished wood and fresh flowers comforting, a reminder that I had crafted and maintained every detail. I celebrated small victories quietly, a perfectly arranged table, a well-timed catering service, the way guests effortlessly flowed through the space, all affirmations that preparation and patience were stronger than manipulation. By the end of the week, even my daughter-in-law seemed to accept the unspoken hierarchy. She moved with more care, spoke with more thoughtfulness, and no longer tried to impose herself where she had no standing. I allowed a small, knowing smile when she complimented my organization, fully aware that she was acknowledging the invisible authority she could never claim. I felt the balance restored, the harmony of the family preserved, and the subtle thrill of victory lingered beneath my calm exterior. I had handled deception with grace, power, and patience, and in doing so, I had reminded everyone, especially her, that true control is earned quietly, but its impact echoes loudly. The next family gathering felt different. The tension that had hovered over the past weeks was gone, replaced by a subtle but unmistakable respect. My daughter-in-law moved through the room with a polite composure, carefully observing the flow of the event, never attempting to assert herself beyond the boundaries she now understood. She had learned, without words, that some authority could not be challenged. I watched from the head of the hall, the sunlight catching the crystal chandeliers, casting warm reflections across the polished floors. The scent of fresh flowers and baked bread filled the space, a comforting reminder that I had crafted this environment with care, patience, and precision. Every table setting, every chair, every decorative flourish had been mine to control and had been respected. My son leaned in, whispering a quiet thank you for managing everything so effortlessly. I smiled, a small private victory, knowing that he saw both the challenge and how gracefully it had been handled. The family moved seamlessly, laughter and conversation flowing like a river around the hall, unaware of the subtle lessons being absorbed. When my daughter-in-law approached me later, she lowered her eyes slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice measured. It wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition of the order she had tried to disrupt and the authority she had no choice but to respect. I nodded, returning a calm smile. No lecture, no harsh words. The day had already taught her everything she needed to know. By the evening, the hall was quiet again. Lights dimmed, tables cleared. The air scented faintly with leftover roses. I stood alone, taking in the space I had curated. The family dynamics now restored, the subtle hierarchy reaffirmed. I felt a surge of contentment, not from revenge or humiliation, but from the clarity of control, patience, and foresight. She had tested me, tried to impose her will, and learned her lesson without drama, without confrontation. And I had shown quietly and effectively that true authority is not about showing off power. It's about orchestrating the environment so precisely that others recognize it naturally without needing to be told. I locked the doors behind me, the keys cold and solid in my hand. The banquet hall, my domain, remained intact, a symbol of my patience, my strategy, and my unwavering presence. I smiled, confident and calm, knowing that the lesson had been delivered, the boundaries had been set, and the family had been preserved. and for the first time in weeks, I breathed fully, feeling the quiet satisfaction of victory, silent, elegant, and completely mine.